To begin, the sport which I have chosen is football. I will now explain the physics present in the sport of football. My name is William Woods. This is for Physics Class 2010 for the Tennessee E-Campus. The sport at which I chose is American football, with the big collisions, flying objects, and forces applied. This was the best one to choose. The common physics concepts that are present include elastic and inelastic collisions, torque, center of gravity, force, momentum, Newton's laws 1, 2, and 3, air resistance, displacement, velocity, and acceleration. Football is full of physics wherever you look, and the sport itself wouldn't be as entertaining without them. From the first snap to the last play, it is the aspect of physics that makes the game. There is not a moment that physics is not being used or is in action. Now, I will go in depth of these concepts. To begin, the first two I will do is inelastic and elastic collisions. An inelastic collision is when the total momentum of the system of objects is conserved, or, in other words, when the two colliding objects stick together and become one mass. An elastic collision is when both momentum and kinetic energy are conserved, or when two colliding objects bounce apart after the collision, which is they hit each other and they go the opposite directions. An example of that is when two opposite players run into each other, they will either stick together, one being tackling the other, or one falling into the other, and be brought down, which is inelastic, or one will be shoved off in the opposite direction, which is elastic. This is the most appealing physics concept in the sport of football. The next concept is torque. Torque is anything that causes another object to spin. The formula for torque is T equals F times D, where T is torque, F is force, and D is distance. An example of this is when a player goes to tackle another player, and instead of hitting them straight on in the center of the body, they hit them more on the sides, the left or right, which causes the player they hit to spin in the direction the tackle was applied. So say an offensive man was running towards a defensive man and then tried to juke, which is, move left or right, and stopped. Well, the defensive man misread it and hit him on the left side. Well, he would spin to that left side and go down. Another example is when a football is thrown from the hand. The hand usually makes a spinning motion as it's coming over the body, which gives the football the appeared, what people call the spiral, which is spinning round and round, cutting through the air. Center of gravity. The center of gravity is the imaginary point in a body of matter where the total weight is thought to be concentrated. Center of gravity determines if a player is going to win the head-to-head battle from the offender/defender being faced. Every human has a center of gravity, but where it is depends on the size. Now, where center of gravity comes in big is offensive and defensive linemen. Now, the lower the center of gravity, the more chance you have of pushing the opposite player over, or pushing them down, or stopping them from getting to your quarterback or downfield. The lower your center of gravity, which is the lower you start and the higher you hit, the more chance you have of winning that battle. Force. Force is everywhere in the game of football. From hits to throws to punts, there is not a single play that can be run, that can be thrown, that can be carried out in any way that does not involve force in some way. The formula for force is F equals M times A, where F stands for force, M stands for mass, and A stands for acceleration. In a test performed by Sports Science, a popular TV sports show, they put a football player, Ray Lewis, of the Baltimore Ravens, up against a battering ram to see who could break down a solid wooden door and to see who could put more force on the impact to the door. Now, first, it was a 15-pound battering ram held by a professional door breacher, and he applied a force of 800 newtons. Then Ray Lewis took 3 steps, crouched down, and ran towards the door and burst through the door, knocking all the hinges off the door and pulling the screws out of the door, and applying a whopping force of 1,000 newtons. He applied more force than a battering ram and a professional door breacher. Momentum. Momentum refers to the quantity of motion that an object has. It is commonly referred to as mass in motion, because all objects have mass. So if an object is moving, then it has momentum. How much momentum there is depends on 2 quantities, mass and velocity, which makes sense because the formula is momentum equals mass times velocity, or P, which stands for momentum, equals M times V. A common theory involving momentum is a conservation of momentum, which says that the total momentum before a collision must equal the total momentum after the collision, which just so happens to be Newton's third law. Momentum continued. A form of momentum also talked about is angular momentum, which is the product of the moment of inertia and the angular velocity. The spiral that can be thrown by a quarterback is more indirect and has to do with angular momentum, the same thing that makes a gyroscope a useful tool for navigation. Once a ball starts spinning, it has angular momentum. Newton's laws are the main aspects of physics that are thought of when you think about football. We'll start with Newton's first law, which states that an object at rest will stay at rest, and an object in motion will stay in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted on by an external or equal force. An example is a runner starts running towards the end zone. He will continue to run unless stopped by a defender along the way. Newton's second law. Newton's second law states that the acceleration of an object as produced by a net force is directly proportional to the magnitude of the net force, in the same direction as the net force and inversely proportionate to the mass of the object. The formula A equals F net divided by M, where A is acceleration, F net is net force, and M is mass. A punter kicks the ball downfield. The more magnitude he puts to the ball, the further it goes. Newton's second law compared to impulse. Impulse is almost exactly like Newton's second law, but where the second law is A equals F net divided by M, impulse is force times the change in time and is expressed as F times delta T, or the change in time. Newton's third and final law. His third law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This can be seen when a quarterback runs into an offensive lineman and is bounced back because there is an equal force pushing back on him. Or when a wide receiver jumps for the end zone and then is pulled back down to earth. Yes, his force is pushing up, but there is also gravity pushing back down on him to bring him back down to earth. Air resistance. Air resistance is defined as the result of collisions of the object's leading surface with air molecules. The actual amount of air resistance encountered by an object is dependent upon a variety of factors. To keep the topic simple, it can be said that the 2 most common factors that have a direct effect upon the amount of air resistance are the speed of the object and the cross-sectional area of that said object. This is experienced by a ball as it's flying through the air downfield. With no air resistance, once the ball was thrown, kicked, punted, it would sail right into the stands or right outside the field because nothing is stopping it, nothing is pulling it down. Displacement. Displacement is the change in position, which is similar but not the same as distance. An example is when a player is practicing throwing the ball up into the air. The distance is doubled, which is the height up and the height down, where the displacement is 0 because the ball starts in his hand, goes up in the air, and then comes back down to his hand. So the displacement is 0 because the ball really didn't go anywhere. Velocity. Velocity is the rate at which displacement occurs. Velocity can be negative or positive. An example is how high and how fast the ball is thrown up into the air. Velocity is measured in meters a second, versus acceleration, which is the rate of change of velocity, and is measured in meters a second squared. Acceleration, which was previously discussed, is the rate of change of velocity. An example of that is during the game of football, when a run play is snapped, a running back accelerates slow towards the defensive line, looking for an open lane, looking for an open hole. But once he finds that open hole, his acceleration increases to his full potential, trying to get as far down the field and as fast down the field as he possibly can. Conclusion. To conclude, the sport at which we call football is not only a high-octane, fast-paced battle on the gridiron, but is a game filled with so many elements of physics that it is overflowing. From the minute the players enter the field of play, there are collisions, flying objects, runs, and forces that are present everywhere. For this project, I could not have found a better sport to choose. From Newton's laws, to air resistance, to inelastic and elastic collisions, football was built on and built for physics.